Hey everyone, Pastor Mark here with Harmony-Toluca Lake, and for another Short Stories podcast episode, part of Our Story, the podcast. And today I am welcoming a good friend of mine, Kenny Dickson, who is from the Dallas, Texas area. And Kenny and I have known each other for a number of years. He was the pastor over at my hometown church back in Texas. And Kenny is part of the United Methodist Connection System and community partnership currently is at King of Glory, which is a Lutheran church. So it is so good to see you, Kenny.
Great to see you, Mark.
You have so much going on, and you and I both have love for film. A wonderful connection between the two of us is our journey of seeing film through a lens of faith. And you actually were inspired during the pandemic to create a podcast, yes?
Yes. So I created with my co-host, Michael Hatch, who is a clergy spouse. His wife serves a Methodist church in the area. He teaches broadcasting at a large high school in the area and was in radio for 25 years and is a film geek, as he describes himself. So in the midst of the pandemic, we thought we'd give it a shot, give podcasting a shot. I'd had a blog for several years, but I had always thought about dipping my toe into podcasting. So we had time with the pandemic, and we went ahead and jumped in, and I think we've had 98 episodes now. So we're closing in on 100.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, why did you pick the title Faithspotting?
Well, originally I wanted to use pulpit fiction. I'd use that actually as a sermon title, and our niche for Faithspotting is finding non-faith specific films that yet reflect elements of faith, and so. Pulp fiction was very much a sort of a groundstone for me, and really realizing the power that film can have, and especially films that are not faith specific, and showing redemption and that in a way that will appeal to marginally churched or unchurched folks. So when that title was not available, actually it's used by I think some Episcopal priests who use it for lectionary podcasts.
Yes.
I just came up, I saw train spotting, I think, and then faith spotting. That's what we do. So we spot faith in film. So that's sort of how that came to be.
Well, that's fantastic. So Faithspotting is on Spotify and iHeart and all the other opportunities where you can listen to podcasts. So just giving you a shout out on that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, hey, we got to enjoy Oscar Sunday and saw quite a number of films being honored. And I want to focus on just a few from a faith perspective today, but we definitely want to give a shout out to just the wide breadth of wonderful films that we've been gifted with. It was such an impactful show. Got to give it to Ryan Gosling. He slayed it with that song, but also he was very funny with Emily Blunt. Loved the little Barbenheimer going on.
Yeah, that was good. And as a member of the Ken community, I do want to lift him up, and really that was, I think, the highlight of the show, and far surpassed the other presentation of the song from Barbie. Again, from someone from the Ken community.
Well, I just, as you know, I'm a big fan of Poor Things, and I'm hoping to actually incorporate that into a sermon at some point. But there were just so many powerful films like Rustin, talking about Bayard Rustin and his activism and the differences that he made, which is many people don't know about. There was American Fiction and of course, Barbie. Anatomy of a Fall. Very powerful. And talk about a huge, powerful slate of international films this year.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I'm sort of in an international film mode. One of my favorite films is Perfect Days. In fact,
that's from Japan.
That's a Japanese film made by a German director. So which was neat for this year, because then you had Zone of Interest, which is a German language film produced and made by Great Britain, and the French should have perhaps put up Anatomy of a Fall, which would have been an English-speaking film, almost primarily from a French. So we had all this nice stew mix of international films and directors and countries coming together. But yes. Perfect Days, really, out of the nominated films, really including even the ones that were nominated for here, the 10 for Best Picture, it was my favorite film of the nominated films, both in the film experience, but also in the faith connection. I think it had, well, that and Zone of Interest in terms of a direct, powerful faith connection.
Well, let's talk about both of those films. Let's start off with Perfect Days. What do you see from a faith perspective that speaks to you and to others?
Well, it's enjoying every day. I mean, the story narrative of having a middle-aged man whose life is cleaning toilets in Tokyo, although very nice public toilets in Tokyo. He's content with his life, and he comes out, and every day he looks up at the sky and the sun, and he has a smile on his face. And for me, it's the living embodiment of the Psalm. This is the day the Lord has made. I say that every Sunday. That's how we open our worship. And then, of course, the congregation responds, "Let us rejoice and be glad." So here we have somebody that is how he lives his life. And he's not worried about the other things that weigh other people down. And we meet some of those later in the story. And it's looking for joy and for beauty in the small things in life, the reflection of trees and shadows and all of that. So it really was a beautiful, beautiful film and a faith statement of how we should live a non-anxious life, rejoicing in the day that each day God makes.
Yes. And then, of course, we have the offset of the Zone of Interest. Looking at that from a faith perspective, how would you share that with others?
Yeah, I think, and we covered this one in an episode, I think this is the most powerfully challenging film for persons of faith that I've seen in some time. In a lot of ways, and even Spielberg is a film set in the Holocaust. Spielberg even mentioned this is perhaps the best Holocaust film. And in some ways, it's even more powerful because, we look at Schindler's List or others, and most of us don't see ourselves as German guards, being the actual instruments of the actual torture. But this film really challenges us and by depicting people trying to make an idyllic life, trying to go on with their lives, loving their children, but yet hearing the suffering of persons just on the other side of the wall at a concentration camp at Auschwitz. It challenges us as persons of faith. We hear people suffering outside our walls or our community or our neighborhoods. I drive by, people living under bridges here in the Dallas area. We hear the suffering of people outside our walls as a nation. And to not do anything is then, it speaks to us and challenges us, to do something, to hear their needs and not just tune them out as we go about setting up our, what we would think would be perfect ministries, perfect lives, and all of that. And so just how it invites us to consider, how we enable the banality of evil or suffering by our not reaching out, I think is stunningly powerful. And, as individuals, as society, as faith communities, to one extent or another, we're all culpable, I think.
Yeah, and it's such a stunning film. I remember when I saw Schindler's List, where I was just, at the very end, it was just dead silence, and no one spoke after leaving the audience. And the same film experience here with Zone of Interest. It's just, you're left without breath almost.
Yeah.
And just so impacted by the storyline.
Absolutely. And I also appreciate, and it was a big risk, and I won't give it away, but there's a sharp turn right at the end of the film that, again, I think doubles down on the filmmakers saying, what will you do? How will you, how do you respond? And so again, I think it's just one of the more, from a faith perspective in a community of faith, the more challenging films I've seen in some time.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing about this. I've got two more films that we want to focus on. The Holdovers. Of course, Paul Giamatti is absolutely delightful, and he gave a great performance in this film. And of course, we have Ms. Randolph, who won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress and did a phenomenal job. What did you think about The Holdovers from a faith perspective?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed the obviously the entire film, and I was really torn between Paul winning and Cillian winning. My heart was wanting Paul to win, but I just think Cillian's performance in Oppenheimer, which I'm guessing we'll talk here in a minute, was just so powerful. But, there's all sorts of things. I mean, and again, using film as a parable, you have Davine Joy's Randolph's character, literally named Mary. And so you have Mary and Paul's character and all of the holdovers, almost like there's no room for them in their respective ends. So they're at their home. So that's why they're holding over. And so there's that dynamic. And then when we get to the actual, pretty quickly to the three primary characters, you sort of have that sense of nowhere to go outside of their community. And so then, and speaking of community, there's each of them had pain, each of them had loss, each of them had suffering that they were dealing with. And it was them coming together, as so often happens within their community, that they were able, in the midst of and because of their own personal wounds and that they're able to come together and be a support for one another and allow healing to grow out of their community. So that certainly speaks to what we as faith communities are called to do. We come with our wounds, we come with our challenge, we come with our joys as well, and it's that coming together, and obviously the community that would include God through the Holy Spirit, that we are able to come, be healed, serve one another, help others. The other aspect, I think, was with Paul's character. He had been hurt, and he had swallowed, if you will, his anger at most of the time. It did come up at times. But for years of not dealing with his anger, with his grief, in that from what he received as a child, the film shows the consequences of that, and that he allows that anger to impact, literally the lives of his students. And so the mission or the message, I think, for that is, we really do need to deal with our emotions, with our issues, and not let them fester, not let them sort of linger and then have more power later in life.
Well, I like that, Kenny, about all three characters were dealing with anger issues, but they were all dealing with them in different ways, which I really enjoyed the exploration of that, but also how they came together in community, but then to bring in the aspect of courageousness, to lift them above. Yes. I found the performances all beautiful. The story is great. And I really appreciate you sharing that perspective with us as well. And we encourage people to go see The Holdovers. Great film. But then, of course, Now let's head over to Oppenheimer, which won Best Picture. It got 7 Oscar wins, and congratulations again to Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas, and Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. and just the whole bunch. A powerful, powerful film. Well, let's focus real quick from a faith perspective. What do you see about this film that will speak to the audiences, as well as for our perspective as Christians?
As you said, this is just so loaded with things, and some of that being, how being an example of actual scriptural text. So, it shows, going back to Genesis in the fall, the temptation of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and how tempting that is, and in the course of Oppenheimer, how tempting it was to touch that and to see if they could get that technology, and once they had it, then instead of bringing security, instead of bringing a sense of allowing them a sense of peace and all that, it just brought more insecurity. It brought more fear. It brought up the need for more power and escalating that. They saw how naked they were as again, going back to Genesis. And so that fear and the vulnerability, that little bit of knowledge helped, then required more and more ways to access even more power, which then just, again, magnified how more vulnerable they were. And also from a perspective on a personal level, just again, which a lot of the films I think that were nominated and that came up this year, it shows the place or the misplace of pride and ego in our characters. And so Oppenheimer, as careful as he was, again, there was that issue of pride, that could he do it? Could he, be the one that leads this effort? And I think that really came out in the celebration they had after the, I can't remember if it was a successful test or the announcement of the actual draw. I think it was a successful test. They had this rah cheerleading moment, and he got swallowed up in that, even though he knew or had this feeling that they had just opened up a door that was going to lead to a very dark place. He couldn't resist having pride in opening up that door. Also, again, the temptation and the seduction of, which I think can speak to all of us, of righteous ends allowing us to participate in unrighteous means. And so, the righteous end mean to end the war, would justify these unrighteous means. So I think that's another thing that we can take and use in our life in whatever way we can.
Well, it's again, Kenny, it's one of those where it's like we've always heard the phrase "the end justifies the means," and it's like, well, did it? And it's a great moral, ethical question to be pondered. Yeah. And so, we'll conclude our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to do another one of these. It's always great to talk about film and faith, and just to be able to connect with you.
Absolutely. It's great to see you again and talk film, and thank you for plugging Faithspotting, and we'd love to have you on sometime as a guest.
I would love that as well. So to our podcast listeners, we again thank you for listening to Short Stories, part of the Our Story, the podcast. And so download, like, share, do all those wonderful things. And we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Peace.